I first got to know Coraline about 9 years ago. Back then, I couldn't even finish watching it because I was extremely scared by what was happening. As an 11-year-old boy, I was honestly terrified of watching that film, and I'll admit, up until 2019, I still hadn't worked up the courage to rewatch it. But recently, I finally decided to face my fears and watch it all the way through. And you know what? I was pleasantly surprised. I realized that Coraline isn't nearly as scary as it seemed to my 11-year-old self. That said, I completely understand why this movie leaves such a strong impression on children. Even though Coraline has a PG rating, meaning it's technically a family movie suitable for children, it still carries a dark atmosphere. And although the main themes are clearly aimed at kids, I'd argue there's plenty in it for adults to think about as well. Surely you already know that Coraline isn't just a simple animated film. At first glance, it might seem like one, but the deeper you look, the more you find. There's a huge amount of hidden content, Easter eggs, secrets, and layered meanings that give the story more depth. The fact that dozens of fan theories exist only proves how well thought out and meaningful this film really is. So, get comfortable. We're about to dive into the hidden meanings of Coraline. Many reviewers and content creators often compare Coraline to The Wizard of Oz, The Chronicles of Narnia, Alice in Wonderland, and Labyrinth. And honestly, that comparison makes sense because all of these stories share a very similar structure. The protagonist is a little girl, already shown to have specific traits like bravery, curiosity, and a strong sense of determination. She's bored with her normal life and longs for adventure. She suddenly finds herself transported, usually by some magical means, into another world. Though in the case of Narnia, it's not always such a wonderful world. She enjoys being in this new world so much that she doesn't want to go back to her boring reality. Coraline fits perfectly into all four of these points. From the very first scenes, we're shown a gloomy, pessimistic environment where everything around her feels depressing and unwelcoming. It's the kind of place you wouldn't want to live in. And then Coraline herself appears, almost like a ray of light in this bleak setting. She's the only source of energy and brightness, the only thing we can latch onto in this depressing atmosphere. Before we go further, I want to clarify two things. The movie is based on a book. So for a complete picture, I'll sometimes use references or quotes from the novel. Both in the book and in the film, the story is told through Coraline's perspective. That means what we see isn't necessarily objective reality. It's filtered through the eyes of an imaginative 11-year-old girl. We, as viewers, are essentially placed inside Coraline's head, experiencing events as she sees and interprets them. Later on, the character Wybie appears, and he adds another layer of uneasiness, not so much through his dialogue, but even through his name. In the Russian translation, his name comes across as Zakwielbiria Zak, or something like that, which doesn't sound very dark at all. But in the original English, his name is Wybie, short for Wyborn. That's pretty grim when you think about it. It connects directly to Coraline's own gloomy thoughts. She even asks at one point why anyone would give a kid such a depressing name. This tiny detail instantly raises the level of darkness in the story. Coraline's relationship with her parents, as shown at the beginning of the film, is also far from perfect. From her point of view, her parents treat her with cold indifference. They're too busy, too dismissive, and she feels neglected. This makes us sympathize with her even more. Then the most fascinating part begins. She discovers the other world, the other mother, the other father, the other everything. And in this world, everything is perfect. Her parents cook delicious food for her, unlike in the real world where meals are bland. She's allowed to do things she normally wouldn't be. This strongly suggests that the other world is Coraline's own creation, a fantasy world built around all the things she wishes she had in real life. I know some people don't like the idea that the other world is just a figment of Coraline's imagination, or that everything that happens there is just a dream. But when you look at it closely, the evidence really points that way. Still, when you look at it from that perspective, everything starts to fall into place, and the story takes on a much clearer meaning. And honestly, for the sake of this discussion, it doesn't really matter whether you personally believe in the "it was all a dream" theory, or whether you think all of it actually happened. Some foreign bloggers even compare Coraline to an Oscar-winning short film called The Sandman. It's a 9-minute animated short about a little boy who's too scared to fall asleep. On his way to bed, he imagines all sorts of terrifying things. The hallway seems to stretch endlessly, shadows become creepy, everything starts to look threatening. It's really unsettling. I highly recommend checking it out. I'll drop a link in the description. So why am I bringing this up? Because not only do both works share the same source of inspiration, Neil Gaiman was involved in both, but they also carry a lot of the same themes. And it's not just about having a few similar scenes, though that's true too. The bigger point is this: in The Sandman, the boy's imagination invents horrors that distort his perception of reality. He builds his own terrifying little world inside his head. And that's exactly what Coraline does. When Coraline wakes up the next morning, we see that she's back in the real world, and it's clear she's not too thrilled about it. And come on, who hasn't had that feeling? You wake up after an incredible dream, only to realize, nope, this is reality. To me, that's another strong clue that the other world is nothing more than a dream, a vivid fantasy Coraline creates, fueled by her frustrations with real life. At this point, we start to notice that her parents aren't actually as careless as Coraline thinks. Her dad tries to joke around with her. Come on, I'm not just some boring adult, I can still dream too. To which Coraline rolls her eyes. Dad, I'm not 3 years old anymore. Her mom also shows concern for her daughter, but Coraline refuses to acknowledge it. She brushes it off, too wrapped up in the fantasy of the other world to see the care her real parents are giving her. Now, let's talk about the infamous buttons for eyes. One theory is that the buttons represent perspective. Eyes are the windows to the soul, and by replacing them with buttons, it suggests that Coraline's parents, and others in her life, want her to finally learn to see things through their eyes. In other words, they want her to develop empathy and realize that, yes, they may be busy, but they're working hard to provide for her. Another theory says the buttons act as a mask. Eyes usually reveal someone's true intentions. You can often tell if someone's lying just by looking them in the eye. But with buttons instead of eyes, you can't read anyone's motives. This second interpretation usually applies to those who see the other mother not as a projection of Coraline's mind, but as an external, sinister force. Personally, though, I lean toward the first interpretation. Most people spend 95% of their mental energy thinking about themselves, not others. But in the other world, Coraline gets 100% of the attention. Everything revolves around her. Everything is created just for her. And, as I mentioned earlier, she gets whatever she wants, and then some. But the more she receives, the less satisfied she feels. She always wants more. In the book, Coraline eventually realizes that the other world, which at first seemed so dazzling and exciting, isn't actually what she thought it was. She says, "I don't want everything I want." Nobody does. Wouldn't it be awful if you did get everything you wanted? You wouldn't have anything to wish for. And nothing would mean anything anymore. She comes to understand that real life is beautiful precisely because it has both ups and downs. Without sadness or hard times, you can't truly appreciate joy. A world where everything is perfect would eventually become meaningless. In the book, when the other mother shows Coraline an image of her real parents trapped behind glass, they say, "Oh, how wonderful it is that Coraline is gone. Now we can finally do everything we always wanted to do." This gives us insight into Coraline's deepest fear, that her parents don't really want her around, and that they neglect her on purpose. In the movie, the other mother locks Coraline behind a mirror instead, giving her time to reflect on her behavior, specifically on her refusal to accept the button eyes. What's interesting is that in English, the word reflect has a double meaning: to think deeply about something, and to mirror or show a reflection. So Coraline is literally placed in a mirror, her own reflection, so that she can reflect on her actions. While in this mirror world, she encounters the spirits of 3 ghost children who were also once lured by the other mother. They were seduced by her false promises and couldn't resist, eventually losing their souls. In one of the most haunting images, We see them against the backdrop of Van Gogh's famous painting Starry Night. That detail is deeply symbolic, since Van Gogh himself included a biblical reference when painting one of the stars in the sky. It connects directly to Genesis 37 verses 9 to 11. Then he had another dream, and he told it to his brothers. "Listen," he said, "I had another dream, and this time the sun and moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me." This verse is about the character of Joseph, who was sold into slavery by his own brothers and later ended up imprisoned in Egypt. It's also interesting because Joseph's story is strongly tied to dreams. He both interpreted dreams and experienced them himself, sometimes while in captivity. That's why Van Gogh's Starry Night appearing in Coraline is no accident. It's a subtle but powerful symbol. After everything that happens, Coraline returns to the real world and reunites with her parents. And almost immediately, we notice something has changed. Their interactions feel different, more warm, more caring. Maybe it's because her parents finally managed to finish writing their gardening catalog, but most likely it's because Coraline herself has changed. She's finally learned to appreciate what she has. She's learned to put herself in her parents' shoes, to see things from their perspective. Because the truth is, her parents didn't really change at all. They're the same people they always were. What changed was Coraline's attitude toward them. Once her perception shifts, her whole world becomes brighter. Suddenly, her neighbors seem interesting, her parents feel more colorful, even though they've been the same all along. The lesson here? Don't demand everything right away, or it'll come back to haunt you later. Be patient. Learn empathy. Learn to put yourself in other people's positions so you can understand them better. And of course, never trust women with buttons for eyes. Naturally, this isn't the only meaning behind the story. There are countless theories and interpretations. This was just one way to look at it. By the way, before I wrap up, let me leave you with a little dialogue from the book, just some food for thought. Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. Coraline is speaking with the black cat. "Cat, what's your name?" "Coraline. Me? I'm Coraline." "Cat, cats don't have names." "Coraline, really?" She asks in surprise. "Cat, that's right. Now, you humans have names. That's because you don't know who you are. We, on the other hand, know exactly who we are. That's why we don't need names."